I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Jacob Barhak to present for our March MIDAS webinar. Jacob is an independent computational disease modeler. So he's modeler without portfolio, and I really admire the work of anybody who can do this without having the university and the funding world to back them up. And so I've got to say that as just an appreciation for that. Jacob focuses on machine comprehension of clinical data, among other things that he's been working on. He's worked on something called the reference model for disease progression, which is a patent technology that he developed. And I don't know anything about that. I might like to learn at some point. But he used that to build a diabetes model and the first COVID-19 multi-scale ensemble model. His efforts also include standardizing clinical data through clinicalunitmapping.com, and he's director of the microsimulation tool. Dr. Barhak has a diverse international background in engineering and computing science and is active within the Python community. Jacob, thank you for agreeing to speak to us, and the floor is yours.
Well, Harry, you do know about the reference model. We'll tell
Yeah,
me
you
at the
told
end
me.
if you remember.
Yes, I don't
Not
know
only
enough
told
about
you,
it.
you
How about that?
remember it, but you will now be reminded because what I do is I do have patented technology, but this actually sprung out from there. I was modeling COVID-19. I'm still am, by the way. I have a machine here that models COVID-19 still. There's a good friend of mine. His name is John Rice, and he asked. He was in the government for many years. He's retired now, but he said, "Oh, there are no lessons learned. There's nothing to improve whatever the government is going to do or the university is going to do in the next pandemic. We have like thousands of papers." So what happened is that I started writing a draft, and in the same time, I asked MIDAS for help. I want to collaborate on my ensemble model, and Kayode Oshinubi, I hope I'm saying name right. He joined me because of the Midas Network posting, and he actually gave me a nice hospitalization model. Filippo Castagnoli gave me a mortality model before, but then Aviral and Christine joined me because they wrote the paper independently. I heard about them and said, "Oh, we're writing how to make things better for the next pandemic." So they actually joined this effort. It's now at the level of a preprint. We are going to publish it in one of the journals. We already now selected one, but we'll see what will happen. I'm giving this talk so people can give me feedback. You may not like or not like what I'm going to say, but I'm going to try to improve things for the next pandemic because this one we didn't handle well. We want the next one, everyone to be ready. And for this, we need to do many, many things, and we started writing them down. Now, I do have a conflict of interest statement. It's a long one. I won't go into details. You can download my entire presentation here, either through the link or pick up their phones. You can take this QR code and the presentation will be available. Hopefully, Harry or Kristen will make it available for everyone later on. The link is there. You can download it. So you can check out my conflict of interest. I do have patents to support my technology. So I do have, in whatever I'm saying, I do have financial incentive here when I licensing my patent. So it's important for you to know that I'm coming from, not from the university. I'm a little bit biased here. I do want this technology to be used. So the preprint is available here. You can take it from the QR code. And most importantly, we actually kept track of all of our activities on the documents. There's a Google Doc that we started, and it is part of the preprint. You can actually go back and see all our discussions. I made it public so you can actually see the edits we made from the first version to the version it is now, but we'll see how it will get published after review at the end. For now, I'm looking for feedback. And we found like 12 things, a little bit more because some of them have some sub elements that we can point to that we can categorize them as falling into modeling, which is most modelers are interested only about modeling. But no, to get modeling, you need to get data and information. All of this, there are other things you should do to improve this because in this pandemic, things were still not good and we need to improve them. Especially we need, of course, we need to improve things with modeling, which is usually what we do. About validation, this is something that people don't think too much, but this is very important. Today there are tools to do this, especially the ensemble models that I'm dealing with. But more importantly, education and infrastructure. We need to renew this. Our infrastructure and education are very old by now. The SIR model that we're using, it's more than 100 years more old. There are new, better tools to do the same thing. So, or even better. So we need to start adopting them and start teaching towards them. So let's start going one by one, and I'll be brief because I have a lot to cover, and I don't want to keep you here for 2 hours. So I'll try to do it as quick as possible. So the first thing is with the data. We need to record the infections, the hospitalizations, and death per region. People think that we did this in the last pandemic. Well, no. We actually started doing this way after, because all the news reporting, when you put reporting for one source or another, the sources were not standardized. We didn't have things like community for, we had problems like in one source that I'm familiar with, number of community organization did not monotonically increase. So there's an error. But I believe that everyone who modeled the pandemic saw that there are problems there in the data itself. Some of them have been reported, like mortality miscounting, some have not. So it's important to have some level of consistency in the recording of the data. And those things, therefore, should be somehow audited. So first of all, the data should be made public in a trusted location, not like in many sources or competing sources like was in the last pandemic. I'm trying not to name sources too much, but I will say, for example, the information that was the World Health Organization was not very good. It was provided in PDFs, and like you could not extract data from there easily. You needed a man in the middle, while other sources had an API that you can actually go and drag the data, or at least in CSV file, which is easy to go and for machine purposes use. So all of this needs to be improved, and there should be one trusted locations, not 1,000. So everything should be channeled into one place that we do trust, and we know that there's some quality control done there. There is a lack of standardization in the data. It's also important what you actually are looking for. So, for example, numbers that you reported sometimes positive tests, but the tests were different from different places. So why is it in the same column? Because this is the best we could. But then again, this is not the number of infections that we do have. But there are modern methods today that are such as wastewater metrics that can help data be more accurate, that will tell you what's the level of infection in your population and not in whatever you tested. So things like this needs to go into the channels, and whoever is organizing this for the next pandemic, we need to be ready with our data in one trusted source. Second thing we need to do, and this is for modeling purposes, we need to estimate the infections curve. Half a year into the pandemic, this is May 2020, the Department of Homeland Security, which did great, they had a master question document that was really, really informative, but they still did not know what's the average infectious period during which individuals can transmit the disease. That's a question they ask. So this is halfway through the beginning of pandemic. This is a problem not to know something like this, or at least have some assumptions. There are several ways to do this. We can record this through in patients, but then again, each patient is different, so we actually have to have a distribution. I'm showing you some infections curve that appeared later that I extracted for the model that I did, but all of those, some of them came in a year or a year and a half later into the pandemic. We need it faster, not at the end after everyone computed where it's actually not useful. Infection curve should be applied by also retrospective calculations, which is okay, but those can be coming later. But we need this information, and we need people starting gathering those. Also, we need to know the estimate transmission rate per encounter. Now, when someone think epidemiologists think about the transmission, thinks about R0 or R0. So there's a problem here because this is a number that has tied to the SIR model, which is more than 100 years old. Yes, it does have some meaning. But then again, if I ask a person in the street, if I ask them what R0 is, they will not know. They will say, oh, it's high or low because people tell them in the news. But if I tell a person that your chance with an encounter of, let's say, 15 minutes to transmit a disease, assuming that you are infectious and they are not at maximum infection, is 5% or 10% or 2%, then the person understands the risk and knows how to behave. It's something that's more comprehensible than this R naught, which is part of a mathematical formula. I actually make sometimes my own, when I go into a cab driver, I tell them what I'm doing. They ask me what you do, and I ask them, what's the chance of what's your chance of someone getting a disease by meeting someone? And usually the numbers I get are incredibly high. I hear 70%, 50%, and so on. Like they think that an infectious person immediately transmits disease to you. If this was like this, we're all infected in no time. People don't get it, and they were afraid because of this psychological thing. If the numbers, the real number is roughly, after my calculations, about 2%, a bit lower than 2%. So people should know about this, but we should actually calculate that, not the R naught. And this number later should be modified by other factors, such as population density, regional climate, ventilation, public consultation availability in a place. Specifically, regional climate, I actually found out that warmer areas such as the states, I will say states, actually transmit the disease lower than those that have colder weather. I'm talking only about the temperature. Maybe the reason is not the temperature, maybe it's the behavior of people in the temperature, but still, I was able to show it with calculations. So those things can affect later on those transmission numbers. And we do need to, this number, if you take into account some other factors, eventually can build R naught that you're familiar with. So this is one way to go about it, which is not necessarily tied to the SIR mechanism that people use. So if you know the infectious transmission rate and number of encounters, then you can combine R naught backwards. You can combine back R naught, sorry. So we want to replace the century-old model with something more modern that is people can understand perhaps better. I'm saying perhaps because it's still complicated. We need to estimate encounter frequency per region. I know people have all those contact matrices. This is one way to do this, but there's other ways to do the same. We need to know the number of encounter per regions. I used, for example, in my calculations, I used average numbers and some statistics and just generated statistics around them. It's also important to know things like household size. Why? Household size, and which you can get it from the census, because, or at least an average. Why? Because then if someone gets sick, they're still in contact with people, but only in their household. So the number drops significantly. And you can actually model this. So those are small little things that you can model. Now, importantly, today this data is not available in one single source. You have to collect it from multiple papers. We wanted one hub, such as, like, for example, MIDAS started a hub during the pandemic. You could get lots of data, but still in papers. But what about something that shows you each one of those elements that I'm showing you of data that you can actually pick up from modeling, but from one source, and then later decide what model you're going to make? If we had that in the next pandemic, then our work as models will be much, much easier and will do much better work. You can then help compare with strategies that reduce the effect of a pandemic, because if you know it per region, you can actually see what's happening per region. And more importantly, this is what I'm doing, the reference model. I'm actually trying to explain the pandemic. I'm not trying to forecast. I'm trying to figure out which one of the models here explains better what's going on. So I'm going backwards from the data instead of trying to forecast a few weeks ahead, because it's kind of difficult. We'll talk about it in a minute. We need to estimate the mortality profile. Now, this is important. You don't need only to know when you are, what's the chance of dying. You also need to know the time. Because later on, when you model, you need to also figure out when the person died, so you can compare it to the numbers that were actually reported. So mortality is now combined of two things, and you can combine them together. This is Filippo Castiglione. He actually gave me a model that combines them together. He actually modeled cells and organs, like how many cells are infected, and then when the organ gets to failure, and then when the person fails, and then he adjusted it and he gave me a model that I can use. And this is the model. You don't see it here, but maybe I'll bring in another thing. Here we go. You see, this is his model. You can actually go and per age, you can know for each time exactly what's the chance per day. So if we know a person who's 70 years old, at day 18, it's about 0.6% of dying. So this is combined, and you can actually notice it's combined with age as well in this situation. So this is what we need. We need mechanisms and models like this in the next pandemic, but from the start, not afterwards calculated. And we need all the researchers to look at them and collaborate, not start, aiming in different directions. We need something that's more unified, that we can actually figure out what's going on, but still allow for variety. And there are ways to do this. I'm going to talk a little bit more later. We need to estimate the inaccuracy of reported numbers. Each number that anyone reported has an error. Some places there were data came in a few days later after the weekend, so all of a sudden you saw a spike in the numbers, but the people infected the day later. So all of those things happened already, and therefore we know that there were inaccuracies in the data. I don't want to here blame anyone or say something, but we have all of those inaccuracies in any data we collect, especially biomedical data is highly, highly noisy. There's a reason why blood pressure should be measured, for example, in the human 3 times sitting down. There are instructions how to do it. And the reason is because there is variety in the data itself. The biological data itself is already very noisy compared to other types of data. Like, for example, the data that flows in your TV or your computer is very accurate, digital. This is highly noisy, so we need to estimate the noise. And there are delays in reporting. There are issues of cause of death not coming in and not being the correct cause of death, and therefore there was miscounting. And also, like infections, there are multiple types of diagnostic tests with different chance of accuracy, and different regions use different tests. All of this is a big problem in the numbers you're getting. So whenever you get a number, you should also have an observer model. An observer model sits on top of it saying, my numbers are incorrect, and this is how they're incorrect. And there should be multiple observer models. I actually have those in my model, and each one of them is telling me something different. Which one's correct? Well, this is why it's in the sample and has a variety inside. We'll talk. I'm not going to give a lecture about it, but we need those elements to be available for us as modelers as we begin the pandemic, or during the pandemic, as soon as we can calculate them. So we need to have distinguish between modeled numbers. When a computer runs a simulation and says this person is infected and has he's hospitalized and he's still alive, and that person is dead, then it's actually known in the simulation this is what's going on. But on top of it, because this is ground truth for the simulation, because the simulation knows the real or the simulated truth. What we need is always an observer model on top that looks at the numbers and says, no, this number is incorrect. This number is wrong, or this number is delayed, or something like this. And those observer models should be many of them, and then we can figure out and try what's really happening, because the numbers we're getting from reports. I got mine from the COVID tracking project, for example, which did a good work, by the way. Is the best I know from the beginning. This should be done better for the next pandemic, but they did very well. So those numbers have errors inside, and sometimes they tell you there's an error. or actually they give you a grade. This is an A, this is a B, this is a C, meaning like they try to grade how accurate those numbers are according to what happened. So we need mechanisms like that. Um, um, we also want to start simulating that will attempt to match the recorded numbers. This is where I'm getting into things that I'm doing. I'm trying to explain the pandemic. I'm not trying to forecast ahead. I'm trying to say, okay, those are the numbers, and the real life, those models that explain things like number of encounters, behavioral of people's transmission, all of those models work together, and there are multiple of those, and it's like a soup of models, and I'm trying to figure out what of the set of models that explains best the numbers I'm seeing. It includes also observer models. When you do that, then maybe you can actually try to explain what's happening in the pandemic. So it is highly unlikely that models can accurately forecast. We'll talk a little bit about this later on. People who tell you otherwise, well, they probably haven't modeled throughout the pandemic, or I don't know, too many science fiction movies. It's really unlikely the models are accurate. What you need is at least the ability to explain. If we cannot explain, then how can we forecast? So this is why I'm doing. I am using ensemble model tools. What they do is they verify some of the models. They try to verify the model numbers to whatever is being seen. They're trying to compare and contrast with the assumptions. You can plug in assumptions of things that are wrong or not, and the system will balance it off and say, no, this is wrong, this is right. You can have like competing assumptions and see which way the model goes. It can help pinpoint error and comprehension of what we don't understand. I gave the example of the transmission rate of per encounter. This is something that we need. We need something that will explain to people in ways we can show. And then my ensemble models can show things graphically. I showed it in previous MIDAS webinar, but this was before 2 years ago. Now it's advanced to have much more advanced degrees, much more advanced capabilities, but still. We want to be able to improve comprehension over time. I'm still modeling the same beginning of COVID-19 because I'm trying to make sure that my models are actually converging right. And I'm using more and more computing power to do this. My model is called the reference model for COVID-19. And some of the things that I learned while modeling is that I learned more during the pandemic, and I'm still modeling the beginning of the pandemic, not the variants, not something that happened afterwards. First publication, I thought the transmission rate was 0.6. You can try to find the publication. Later on, I figured out it's about 2%. It's actually lower than 2%. So the 0.6 wasn't that far. At the beginning, I thought that long infectious model, it was almost dominated all the infectiousness models. But now I know that there's a mixture of infectious models. Most of them are long, that actually compose what's happening. And it actually makes sense. Not everyone is infectious same way as others because it's individual. But then you can figure out how much of society has a long infections curve, how much short. And then you can give this answer to the DHS according to all the data that you have until the same point. And DHS will not ask that question in the next pandemic. Temperature is an important role in transmission. I figured it out by just modeling the beginning of the pandemic according to numbers that I had then and according to models that appeared later on. One more thing that I learned, it's very important to just repeat the same simulation, not just because it's Monte Carlo and has some random numbers, but because it's important to repeat the same simulation starting from a certain date. Let's say I start with April 1st and then model for 3 weeks and then compare to what happened to see how good the model is. It's a model of 3 weeks. But then I start in April 2nd and see what happens. And then in April 3rd and 4th and 4th. This takes a lot of computing power. And then, of course, they do it in all states and I repeat and for populations and variations and all the things needed for the AI that's working there. But the more computing power you invest, the more you learn about what's happening. So Also, what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to extract the invariant disease parameters, not the ones that change by human behavior. Human behavior is a factor that we can add in later, and you can probably explain it to some degree as well. But it's more important to figure out that we do know the basic things about this virus, how well it transmits, or what's its infectiousness period on average. Those are invariants that will not change unless a new variant comes along. If we can get those, then we can at least now get much, much better simulations or forecasts. Now, it's also very, very important to understand what I'm trying to do and the phenomena here. And I'm speaking for myself, not for my entire group of authors. They may agree with me, but many modelers believe that you can explain the phenomena that we observe. I'm still unsure. I'm trying. My assumption is that I can explain. It still needs to be proved that it is possible, that all the numbers that we collect actually can be explained and properly. So this is something we need to think about. We always assume that we see numbers, we can do things with them. It may be wrong. So there should be an opposite hypothesis we should test as well as scientists. We should make all the resources available and accessible. This is actually a problem. I'm working outside the academic system. So if I use something and I wanted to see benefit of it, then I needed another license that I can use. Even academics need to have the proper licenses to do things. But a lot of the time, you will see publications such as CC by NC, which is non-commercial license, meaning, oh, Jacob, B, you can't use that. So I cannot use the model, can use it. And I have an ensemble. I have many models. So now I'm restricted from using those models because they have the wrong license. Or there's a license called GPL. If I touch a GPL, I basically have to give away all my patents. So I will not see a dime for all my work for years. So it's also wrong. So if you want people to collaborate, you have to have a permissive license that allows it. There are many permissive licenses. I recommend something called Creative Commons Zero. So it is as close as possible to public domain. And this is why I recommend it. Many people recommend it now as well, because think about all of those big biomodels or all of those big databases that you can plug in models today. If you want to build an ensemble that's based on different licenses, you're restricted by what's allowed to combine and what not. So you're basically, the effectiveness of having all those models together or even data together is reduced because you're not allowed to combine it. I have a whole talk about this. I won't talk much more, but this is very, very important. Also, open tools and resources should be made as available as possible to use, and they should be centralized as much as possible in one place. Let's say MIDAS network did a great job at the beginning of the pandemic of actually publications. There was a website of publications you actually go and extract information from. So good for the MIDAS network. They actually did their job there. But then again, we don't need only publications now. We need active components such as data, models, all of those made available. The next pandemic hits, if we're in the same situation we did with COVID, then we probably didn't do a job very well as researchers because we didn't learn from our own mistakes. This is why we're having this talk, so our mistakes can be made better. Now, also it's important, there will be always competition between players, but it shouldn't be diminish the incentives. And this is part of all the licensing rights we're here for. This is Kyoda's work mostly, so I'll try to explain this best as I can. Kyoda, later on you can correct me if I did something wrong or said something wrong. But Kyoda joined because I posted in the MIDAS network that I'm looking for collaboration, and he gave some hospitalization models. He was studying hospitalization of COVID, and he said that to accurately model hospitalization, you need contact tracing efforts, and he actually recommends also wastewater metrics at some point. But he actually, while working with me, he actually understood why it's important to actually go and have real-time simulations. He gave me a few assumptions of his models, and we repeated the simulation. We tried to match them to the number according to and see which one of those assumptions explains well. And he calls it an iterative feedback loop, and which is a good idea, because now you have models and you can check them according to the things you see. And he'll actually show you some of what models he did. He gave me admission rates and he gave me lengths of stay models, because those are both important for people who are hospitalized, because both affect on the numbers reported by whoever is reporting, in my case, the COVID tracking project. So let me show you how they look like here. So he gave me one with low probability, moderate probability, and all of those related to age. And again, mixed hospitalization, early hospitalization model, and late hospitalization model. Later on, if I run on my model, I can actually tell you it's somewhere in the middle, and this is where it comes in. This is where it is. So this is the feedback loop he's talking about. I'm trying to explain the numbers, and from those I extract the best model that is combined from the models I showed you. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So also, it's very important to include baseline models. Let me explain where it comes from. At this point, I was already working on this paper, and then I see a presentation. Lucas Boccio actually hosted it. He helped me in my model. He said there's a presentation, and Aviral gave this presentation, and he was working with a team of people here. I later on, Aviral and Christine joined the paper that we wrote down, and they did work that they actually looked at the CDC model that was done, that compared multiple models. That's another type of ensemble. And he actually wrote work that addresses it and find out that it's better. He actually categorized the goal to the mean absolute percent error, and it included two baseline models that are very simple that you need to compare to. And he says more than 1/3 of the models fail to outperform simple statistics baseline, and 2/3 fail to outperform a simple linear trend forecast. I hope I'm conveying his words right, because they did much more intricate work. You can actually read the paper and see what they did, which is very interesting. So he has several recommendations. One of them is for government officials. Reassessment of the role of forecasting models in pandemic modeling and policy formulation. Because if a simple baseline model can outperform so many, then why are we doing all of this work to do forecasting rather than doing something else? I do explaining, so our ideas kind of converge. I would love to hear someone from forecasting who actually has an opposite opinion. This will be a nice discussion. He raised concerns about directly hosting model in one platform because of reasons how it affects the public, because they don't understand what's going on, basically. And he says that the current models are perhaps good enough to focus things that are going on like waves, but beforehand focus, before wave starts, still requires a hand-on approach. I mean, someone needs to tweak the parameters. I kind of agree with him on this, because you don't have the data yet on something that hasn't appeared. Now, he does raise recommendations for researchers as well. He suggests modeling about 2 to 4 weeks ahead, which actually I had the same problem. The first publication I had the model 3 months, which is no, it was wrong. You cannot forecast that far. A few weeks is enough to actually give you an idea. I modeled today for 3 weeks. And also the fact that it's like other organizations, if you're actually doing something useful with your modeling, then organizations such as hospitals need to actually respond to whatever you're doing. I'm looking at the time here. How much time do I still have? Am I still good? I have like 3 more points, so like 12
Yeah,
more
you're
points.
good. You're good. You're fine.
Okay, I'm not running. I'm trying to make it fast while still. And then he also says you need to focus on data collection methodologies, which is what we talked about before. we have real problem with the data sets. As modelers, if you modeled the pandemic, you felt the pain. You know what I'm talking about. Everyone who's telling you otherwise probably didn't see all the mess that was there around. Expected variations. This is I'm trying. One of my co-authors, Christine, actually was focusing on this more than me. She did some work on it. I can only try to convey her words as best as possible. Hopefully, I did it right. But we will have mutations during the pandemic. Mutations can be, when we see them, we either see waves or we see a mix in the population, things behaving differently. She says that machine models can become less accurate as they are trained with data sets from previous variants. Think about it. You have data of one variant, you train it to machine model, so it will know what happened in that. You need a new model for the new one, but then you have to wait for the data, which is the problem. So the waves that both Christine and Avril are talking about is something that is real, and I'm not sure how well we can model. Also, data may come in behind time because it's supported by labs, it takes time. And also, most very important, the public should be informed of those things the minute they appear, not after. Because previously infected vaccinated individuals are no longer immune the minute a new variant appears. So those are things that are important, that we have to expect them as variations. Now, we also have some element, some criticism or some constructive criticism, because we do give some suggestions on how to determine means of disseminating things to the public. Before that, it's very important the public is aware of limitations and about the models and the data collected. The data was not always aware. Sometimes you will say a person, but the model says that, and then it's like true from God. No. There are many things that don't work. It's very important to present a larger picture, to even reduce the public anxiety if it's known. I'm not sure the press did it well on the last pandemic, hence we're writing this paper. When reporting the models, it's important to have it reproducible. We are still miserably failing on reproducibility. There were some discussions in the group. You can actually, things that are open that we published about how much time it takes to actually take a paper and make it into a model. It takes time. We have to make this time shorter. We have to find out ways that we can communicate better between scientists. A trusting public will understand and actually listen to the authorities more, because in this pandemic, there are people who didn't listen because they didn't trust. So if they know that we're good, then they will trust us better. Also, authorities worldwide should admit errors quickly and humbly. This is something we didn't do properly last time, because for all sorts of reasons, everyone, you've been through the pandemic. I shouldn't say that too much. The idea is to be constructive rather than overly criticizing. It's better if we get it right next time than find who the guilty person is. There are no guilty. We were all guilty to some degree. Computing infrastructure. This is something that we are failing behind as modelers. We need high performance computing. The model I'm doing takes hundreds of years of simulation so far. So far, I've done like 70 versions. We'll talk about it in a second. Also, older models like SIR models, yes, the formula works nicely, but you cannot continue using it if we want to do more sophisticated things. We need better software tools that model things. Even the software tool that I'm working for, the MIDAS simulation tool, it's like 20 years old, 2 decades. And there is also some issues there that it needs to be modernized. But this is the only one that I'm familiar with that can support ensemble modeling and high performance computing. No, all of this needs to be redone. Better infrastructure, new one, not old one. So ensemble modeling technology needs to be addressed further. We're only starting to discover what it can do. I really am believing it. It's like There's be much more work in the future. We need that. Also, we need to focus on models that explain, not models that forecast, because the forecasting wasn't that good, and we still cannot explain properly. I'm still trying to explain. We need more people doing things like I'm doing than people trying to say that we can focus the future. Actually, this is something I have to say. I'm Jewish. We have a saying that prophecy was given to the fools. It's in Hebrew. The reasons are different, but basically we don't believe in prediction. So I ask also, there's a reason why our predictions are not always good. No one can forecast the stock market or stuff like that. Or why do you think we can forecast pandemics if we cannot explain them stuff? Please, please, more explanation, less forecast. So we need to invest both in hardware and software. The hardware is a little bit better these days. So, oh, this is supposed to be, there's a typo here. It's data lakes. Okay, so we need to centralize epidemiological and clinical records. This is part of the problem that the data was all over and we couldn't use them as models. So today there are access to data lakes. We have dashboards of visualization that are easy to make. I showed them. I'm making those. Those are easy. Why can't all models use those? Real-time analytics is something that we need. Machine learning interfaces. Fortunately, the machine learning community is doing great. So I can connect you to some of the communities that like doing real work, real great work with machine learning. And this is something, this is Felipe Costiglioni, he actually wrote this section because he was very adamant about it. He needs access to electronic health records of infected individuals, but then there's a problem. Those are private. How can you make it such that even those that are private, you can do it? There are technology today. I wouldn't self-advertise, but if you use ensemble models, you can do things with it. But there are obstacles like different standards and protocols, geophysical considerations. And we need to fix this. We need common agreement among entities, meaning like governments need to agree, yes, these are the ways which we work and exchange data, and we use those mechanisms. And governments can agree on some things if it's important, but we need to raise them up to that level. We need the best centralization possible within limitations. There will be limitations. Attempts were made to centralize. I'm giving good grade to the MIDAS network. They published papers that did well. It's not because I'm talking here. It's like I have criticism, and Harry will tell you I'm criticizing a lot of times, but they did well at this point, and actually finding researchers, they also did well. But then, in the DHS, although I'm criticizing some of the questions, they did the correct thing of centralizing data to one place. We need more of those, and we need those infrastructures ready. So we need to address also clinical data and not only epidemiological data, because this is what we have access to. And this is what Filippo is asking. Now, we need to train experts in emerging technologies. We're still using a 100-year-old SIR model. And yes, we have variations and everyone is creating a good variation on this, but it's still the same idea. We need to go away. We need to go towards emerging ideas like ensemble models. They're still uncommon. Also, experts in disease modeling don't have in-depth programming background. This should be changed. So we need to train experts in version control, database systems, and new modeling techniques. I'm talking about individual simulation, like Monte Carlo, or there are other techniques, MCMC, whatever. Not only the same old SIR, and of course, ensemble models. And we need, and this is at the organizational level, we need to organize modeling drills. Like every once in a while, we have a drill. This is a new pandemic. The pandemic is not real. It's a drill that we prepare the pandemic with some data, and now modelers and researchers are trying to compete on this and see who can explain it best. This also means national and local government should collaborate to learn their roles on data collection and reporting. The census should be either they outsource it and pay whatever entity is supposed to collect this data and centralize it and do it privately, or do it or centralize it with agreements between governments. We need one source of place that all modelers can go to. This will reduce a lot of the stress from the system. The press, this is very important. The press sometimes doesn't know what the model is capable of and what are the model shortcomings. We can have information such as website articles, education fees, interviews of modelers, and this is just to communicate with press. And those things happened, I know. But since journalists have fluent conversation, they can explain to people something that the modeler cannot, because they use plain language. And this is what they do all day. They know how to explain things to more people, to the masses, better than the scientist who says, oh, this is the equation and this is our not, and the public looks and says, oh, sure, it's a scientist. We need someone in the middle who knows better what's going on and knows what's working, what's not working. So, and most importantly, they should avoid glorifying models or prevent researchers they're interviewing to saying, I have the best model. You know how many times I heard I have the best model? Well, I have the best model. And I'm kidding, of course. I'm not sure who has the best model. We have to understand what's happening and do it properly, and people shouldn't glorify a model. A model is a model, is an assumption. We don't know whether it's correct or not until we test it. And we need to improve our research. Our research has to go into high performance computing. This means going into GPU hardware. Today, I don't know how many studies are made with use GPU hardware for simulations. Things like CUDA parallelization or compiler technology such as Numba or LLVM. I should add LLVM here, actually. Also, we should improve the assembling speed of an ensemble model. 5 years later, I'm still working on COVID because it took me so far over 70 versions. Because each time I plug in a model or whatever, 70 versions, I'm talking about hundreds of years of CPU that I already spent. MIDAS helped me with some of it at the beginning of the pandemic. It actually gave me access to compute power. But all of those things need to be done and in research, because then if you can assemble an ensemble model quicker, better, that can explain what's happening in real time or as near as real time as possible, all of the decision makers will have a much easier life, and the public will be much calmer, and we won't have to go through what we did with COVID. We need better data collection, we need better modeling, and a better reporting cycle. So modelers need this, and this is for the level of research. Well, researchers need this data available, and it is still. I'm raising this hypothesis. We have this hypothesis you can explain the numbers. It is still an open question how fast one can come up with a good explanation of a disease since its outbreak. I'm still modeling COVID-19. I think I stabilized my numbers about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. Then I starting reporting consistently number. I'm still making simulations to try to explain this, to see if it's consistent. What if I'm wrong? I always have to take this into account. So we still don't know how much time it takes. So assuming I have all the computing power available at my fingertips, and assuming I have all the best tools and all the best research and all the best data, can we still explain the numbers we're seeing, or is that really random? I'm not sure. It's a discussion point if someone is interested. And another unanswered question is if we can, under what conditions or consents can we apply this solution to future pandemic? Think about it. We collected a lot of data about COVID. Now you can trace back and try to explain things about COVID. But then again, you explain COVID. Next pandemic will show up, will maybe different. How can we adjust? I'm not sure. It's an open question. How much of this data can we use and how much data is not? and I'm making you a little bit skeptic because I'm trying to approach this in a skeptical way. And this paper is supposed to tell how to make things better. I'm not sure we'll always get it perfect, but at least trying is something that we want to do. And there are many people who helped. You see some even funding that helped at some point to me or to other entities. I have to acknowledge them, but first and foremost to John Rice, who actually came up with the idea of a lessons learned paper. So these are our lessons learned, and these are our steps to go in the next pandemic. And I would love to get feedback from you guys.
Thanks very much, Jacob. Really interesting. Lots of great points to make there, and appreciate some of the kind words you had to say about Midas. We have a few minutes for questions. Folks can type things into the chat or the Q&A, or they can unmute themselves. I'm going to throw out a question to you here just to kick things off. When you say that the SIR model is broken, doesn't work anymore, I like these provocative statements, and I'm not going to disagree with that, but I wonder if sort of the move that the interest in agent-based models, I think can get around some of those limitations, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
So for sure, you can do things you cannot do with the SIR models until you start breaking the compartments to the level of an individual, which makes it kind of, yeah. So there's a problem. You have to actually mitigate between those two approaches properly. The techniques I'm using do it to some degree. The simulations I hold at the individual level, while I'm using summary data, which is compartmental data sometimes, and I mitigate it by generating stuff that matches things. And if I did this correctly, then I know that this can represent that, and I can bypass things like restrictions such as individual data restrictions, because I'm not using that individual data. I just use individual data to match those statistics, which is actually what the SIR model sees. But then later, if I actually get the individual model, the individual data, and actually can run the same simulation on the individual data, then it's much more superior. So this is one thing that I can do that can come up with. The problem is usually the problem of the restriction on the data. So we need to somehow find ways to still keep those restrictions while still working. And I believe that I got a good balance in what I'm doing. I believe. Others may be the judge of it. Maybe there are better ways. Maybe some governments will get into some agreement to have better data. I'm not sure. But the SIR model is 100 years old. How many things of 100 years old are you using today? Even have changed. You're no longer using Newton's law and stuff like this. And like there was a guy who gave a talk, Jonathan Klinger gave a talk about which stuff from the 90s you use today. And he's like, a Discman. Do you use a Discman now? No. So we're talking about 100 years. Why are we 100 years behind? We should use something new as researchers and test whether it's good or not.
So I'm not seeing other questions or comments. So I'm gonna throw out another one of my own here, which sort of follows on from that, which is to say, I want to go from the notion of that old cliche that all models are wrong and some models are useful. And so I want to just sort of get your thoughts on that, to say, yes, I mean, none of your comments, I don't disagree with them, but it seems that to some extent, the question is sort of saying, okay, knowing all that we know about how these models are wrong, shouldn't we then focus on what can we do with them that is most useful?
And you thank you very much. You're falling in my domain. This is why I have 2 patents. Now, I didn't want to self-advertise here, but yes, I can actually show you which models are dominating when and how, under what conditions. You might remember I'm talking about the infectious model. I can actually show you how much of the population uses that longer infectious model and how much is the shorter ones. And this is according if all the numbers that I'm getting are observed correctly and I have all the correct assumptions because the models themselves are assumptions. So Box said, yes, models are only useful, but think about being able to take all those wrong models and combine them into something more useful. This
Exactly.
is what I'm doing. I'm trying to do this. I hope more people will join. But and to do this, we need better research in that direction. And this is what those are the emerging technology. In 5 years they may find out better technologies because today there are even newer things coming into the market of like AI that can be used better. I use them today and I see there might be opportunities, but I'm still thinking, but also, by the way, there's still, even the newest AI is going back to those ensemble models, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the newest AI actually uses ensemble models. They use agentic AI and use multiple agents. It's the same mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Because it makes sense. Here, even more. If you had no models, if you had experts, would you ask only one expert or would you ask like 5 experts for those opinions and then form a decision? Yes.
Absolutely. And I think your broader point here, which is to say that to figure out how to do things right, we've got to start by doing things wrong, is it's very well taken. And so
Okay.
I got to finish up here at
It's
the
your,
top
it's your quote.
top of the hour. Got to finish up at the top of the hour here, but I really thank you, Jacob, for giving us a lot of provocative things to think about. And I encourage folks to get in touch with Jacob. It sounds like he's looking for dialogue and conversation. And so we will get these slides posted soon, and we hope to see you all next month. Thanks again, Jacob. Take care.